Granblue Fantasy Relink is a game with a lot of features to explore, and although the game provides a tutorial for said features, there are still many things Granblue Fantasy Relink doesn't teach players, particularly on how to progress in the game efficiently. This is where our Granblue Fantasy Beginners guide comes in, and it's one of the crucial guides we've created, especially when you're just starting the game. And while the game's progression is relatively straightforward, it's easy to get overwhelmed and fall into traps if you don't know what you're doing. To help you get off to the right foot in your adventure in Zega Grande Skydom, we have compiled a list of tips that will drastically help you in your journey and save you a lot of time. Whether you're new to this series or a seasoned player, this Granblue Fantasy Relink Beginner's Guide will help you get started and make the most of your time. Tip number 1, complete the main story first. When you first set foot in Zega Grande Skydom and reach the first town in Chapter 1, you'll be greeted with NPCs who will provide you with side quests, and the quest counter will be unlocked, which will provide you with even more side quests. At this point, you might be thinking that it's better to complete all of these side quests to gain as many materials or currencies you can before moving forward. However, it's actually quite the opposite. It is advisable to focus first on completing the main storyline so you can unlock more features. There are a lot of things that can only be unlocked after completing the main campaign, and you'll be surprised how much time you'll save by completing the main story first. Post-game quests provide more currency rewards, better sigils to find, and more. So it's actually more efficient to complete the main story first. And you also might be thinking that you need to start grinding right away, especially if the quest counter is already open as early as Chapter 1. If you do this, you'll be getting fewer rewards and weaker sigils in exchange for your precious time. And you also might be wondering, how am I going to progress in the main story if I don't do any grinding or any side quests at all? Won't it be challenging? And the answer is that you can do the main story, it's not that difficult, and you should be able to do it without any grinding whatsoever. Just enjoy the story since it's relatively short and learn the game's mechanics, and in no time you'll be reaching the post-game. And from this point forward, the grinding will begin. Tip number 2, form a balanced party. So you decided to focus on the main campaign, but you notice that there's a lot of starting characters to play with in Granblue Fantasy Relink, and you've realized it's easy to get overwhelmed. Well, your starting characters, which are Rackham, Io, Rosetta, Catalina, and Eugen, are more than capable of carrying you through the story, so don't stress too much about this. I highly suggest selecting 2 pure damage focusing characters and 2 characters that can provide support. So with the starting characters that you have, I usually go with Rackham and Eugen for the damage dealers. They are suggested since they're beginner friendly in terms of their rotation. And for supporting characters, Gran and Catalina can fill in. Gran can easily have access to his failing skill early on, which mitigates incoming damage, and also to his Panacea skill for additional heals. You can use Io as a damage dealer if you want to play with spells, just replace either Rackham or Eugen. Now, if you're looking for more options other than the ones I suggested, the next tip might give you what you're looking for. Tip number 3, what characters to unlock first. If you're not satisfied with my recommendations, no worries, we have more options. Upon reaching Chapter 4, you'll have the ability to summon another ally for the first time in Ciro's Knickknack Shop. The best pick for your first crewmate card, in my opinion, is Cagliostro. I see her as one of the best support characters in the game. Not only can she provide burst heals to the party, but also buffs the party with additional attack, defense, and critical chance. But the best part is, she can revive an ally from critical condition. Revives are huge in Granblue Fantasy Relink, and I cannot stress how important it is to have someone who can provide them. I have lost track how many times she revived me in combat, especially when tackling endgame or harder fights. Overall, she has everything in terms of support skills, so I highly suggest getting her first. If you decided to pick up Cagliostro with your first crewmate card, you can replace Catalina in your suggested party. If you're looking for a DPS character, on the other hand, I suggest getting Lancelot. He is a beginner-friendly character, and his skill rotations and normal attack combinations are pretty straightforward. He's fast, easy to use, perfect for beginners who are just learning the game. And if you want to get them both, just continue progressing in the main story, and soon you'll get another crewmate card. You can, of course, take any characters you want, and you will want to get them all eventually. These are the best 2 for new players. Tip number 4, don't be afraid to upgrade your weapons. As you progress in the main story, like we suggested previously, you'll have limited materials since you're not yet grinding. By just progressing the story, you'll eventually get unmissable materials from bosses that can advance your weapons. You can go to the blacksmith and check if there are available upgrades for your current arsenal, especially for your main character. However, you might have second thoughts if you should upgrade this weapon, since you might be thinking there will be better weapons down the line, just like in typical JRPGs. The good thing here is that you'll need to max every weapon eventually, since each character has a specific tree or section in their masteries, which is called Collection. In the Collections tab, players will be able to check all the weapons they have forged for a specific character. Depending on the weapon's current level, specific nodes will be available that a player can unlock for more stats, just like in other sections of masteries. This is the reason why you shouldn't be afraid to max your current weapon and uncap in the process, especially for your main characters. By upgrading your current weapon, you'll be progressing much faster in the game since you'll be dealing more damage while also unlocking weapon nodes in the process, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Tip number 5, manage your resources wisely. This correlates with our tip about finalizing your first 4 characters while progressing. Now that you've selected your first characters to play with, it's highly suggested to devote your resources solely to them while you're progressing in the main story. If you do this, you'll have a solid footing at endgame when you get there, since you've focused on a well-balanced team. You may get distracted with a wide selection of characters that you can recruit since you will have more crewmate cards as you progress in the main story. I know it's tempting, however there will come a time when you can easily gather resources for a possible new character that you want to raise in level. But you can only raise a character in the fastest way possible if you do have 4 well-raised characters to tackle endgame content. So focusing on laying the foundation first should be the highest priority. If you'll be upgrading weapons, make sure whoever's weapon you upgrade is part of your staple team. The other resources that I can think of are mastery points. This is one of the rarest currencies to come by, especially in the early game. You only get these from completing objectives in the main storyline or when leveling up. The tricky part is if you've used your mastery points for a specific character, they're gone, and you'll need to farm again to raise your second character's mastery. There is no respec option to get these mastery points back. Mastery points are one of the things you will be farming constantly in endgame, but for now, while you're bridging the gap from early game to endgame, make sure you invest your mastery points in your main group, especially since they need more skills to perform in combat. Tip number 6, don't worry about sigils early on. When playing the main story, it's easy to be distracted by your current sigils. Yes, they provide good stat bonuses to your party, however in the early game, it's not advisable to just grind for more sigil types and upgrade them. As mentioned previously, your materials will be limited early on. Also, one of the main reasons why farming for sigils early on is not advisable is because the available sigils during the early game are lower tiers. You'll be getting tiers 1 to 3, and if you're going to farm this manually by spamming quests in the quest counter, you'll have low returns. The main story can be completed without issues with whatever sigils that you have. Work with them and just continue progressing. It is so easy to get higher tier sigils at endgame, and they drop like candy when you have access to a higher level of transmutation in Ciro's Knickknack shop. But not only that, players will be allowed to get special currency called Dahlia badges that can be traded for high tier sigils by completing quick quests at the quest counter. So wait until this point to worry about them or you'll waste a lot of time. And number 7, don't sell materials and sigils for rupees. As you're nearing the end of the main story campaign, you'll notice that you have excess materials in your inventory. Not just materials, but also sigils. You'll have a lot of lower tier sigils and your initial thought will be to sell them and extra materials to gain rupees. Rupees are essentially your gold in Granblue Fantasy Relink to avail blacksmith services such as upgrading weapons. Just like any currency in the game, rupees will be scarce during the main story campaign. I know it's tempting, but selling your materials and sigils for rupees is not efficient since at endgame you'll be able to trade your unwanted materials and lower tier sigils for knickknack vouchers. Vouchers that can be used to transmute higher tier sigils and right stones. The results are random from these vouchers, but the main point is that you'll have a better chance of getting higher tier sigils than selling them for rupees. You'll be swamped with rupees later on since you'll be getting a lot of glitter stones that can be sold for tons of rupees. These materials' main purpose is to give you rupees alone, so you should not need to worry about this currency much. So that wraps up our Granblue Fantasy Relink Beginner Guide. These are things that we think are important to help you avoid some of the unfortunate traps that we've experienced ourselves. Follow these guidelines and eventually you will reach endgame in no time since you'll have avoided wasting your precious time. We will have an endgame guide coming soon as well, so stay tuned for that. Kind of goes through the activities and things that you can do at endgame, but also spend your time efficiently there. So what do you guys think of Granblue Fantasy Relink so far? What did you think of our beginner guide? Can you think of any other tips we didn't mention that would be good for new players? Let us know in the comments below.